Hi, my name is Viraj Mane, and I beat the often path by developing a whole new class of therapeutics that can help and protect immunodeficient patients all around the world.
Biraj Mane is the co-founder and chief scientific officer at Lactiga, an award-winning venture-backed biotherapeutics company treating and preventing infections using an unusual but genius method: human milk. No, seriously, that's right, Lactiga uses human breast milk to battle even the world's most dangerous pathogens. It turns out some people would benefit tremendously from what's found in the breast milk of other humans. And if done right, the power of this novel approach is astounding. Viraj has a PhD in human genetics from Baylor College of Medicine, and he's completed 2 postdoc fellowships, including one for the United States FDA, or Food and Drug Administration. After he became a father, he had a strange but brilliant idea when he saw the excess breast milk stored in his freezer. I know you'll love this episode from a very smart person because this is a truly wild solution. So here's Viraj Mane, I'm Ross Palmer, and this is Beat the Often Path. Welcome to the show, Viraj. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Yours is one of those ideas that is just wild and I think beyond comprehension when we're searching for people who are making meaningful choices in this world of ours. So what is this great insight that you've had, and how the heck did you end up in this path?
A wonderful question. The origin story of all of the company I'm going to tell you about today is becoming a dad. And
Okay.
for many new parents, especially first-time mom, she's pumping late at night or maybe pumping at work, and you don't use it at the moment, but you keep it. You know how precious it
Yes,
is. You
very
hold
precious.
Indeed. And so I came to fatherhood as a new dad, but also a science nerd. I'm like a nerd since early childhood. And so I would look at these pouches that were starting to be accumulated in the freezer and say, everyone knows this is full of nutritious and immune benefits. But more specifically and scientifically, milk is full of antibodies. And those are the molecules we're supposed to produce if we're healthy to fight off all the germs around us. These are viral, bacterial, fungal, parasitic, etc. We have to fight all of that or we don't make it. And so the antibodies in milk are the critical layer that provides that protection to breastfeeding infants. But because we had so much extra in our house, and some of my friends, including my co-founder, Ricken, we became dads around the same time. We all had the same story, like, oh, the freezer is filling up with milk. There's less room for food and other stuff. And we had a laugh about it. But that actually sparked this random idea in my head. It's like that movie Inception. The idea is in there. You can't get it out.
Mm.
And the idea was, if this is in fact a resource that's not just like a couple households, but this is probably happening all around the country, maybe all around the world, could that be an antibody-rich resource if there's extra that could be repurposed in a way to create antibody therapeutics for patients that don't make them? And who are the patients that don't make them? Well, they have immunodeficiencies. And those can be driven by a variety of genetic factors or even non-genetic factors. But the upshot is if you have that condition, you're sick way more often than healthy people. And that's why I felt that I could really commit time to this. If there's a way to take this resource that the pharmaceutical world doesn't really think about and convert it to a pharmaceutical product for a patient population that has a tiny list of stuff that, barely works. I mean, that's something you can build a company on. That's something you can build a legacy on.
Wow. What an interesting story. So before we jump into the specifics on that, my mom didn't breastfeed me as a baby. Is that why I turned out so weird? Because people always say something's got to be wrong with this guy. Do you think
Yeah.
that's it?
Well, I've seen your background, and I mean, something's clearly wrong.
Yeah, something is clearly not functioning as normal. Okay,
This
we'll
is
put a pin in that. We'll put a
nuts.
pin on that. This is actually a psychotherapy session. That's the thing. I hook you with the promise of promoting your company, but then I really just unload my own personal feelings on you. Okay, so you became a new dad. What year was it that you actually became a father?
That was 2012, and
Okay.
the idea was planted back then, but I did nothing with it. I mean,
Mm,
for many entrepreneurs, and you've spoken to so many, the idea gets in there, but maybe you have a family, you have a regular job, and you're like, well, I'm not going to jeopardize this good job. So let's just let that idea live in my brain, and maybe nothing's ever going to happen. And it kind of just kicked around in my brain for honestly about 5 years.
wow.
But I could never get rid of it. I had just been doing my own research in the background, and I had some issued patents in my past, like unrelated to the company Lactiga. So I knew enough about how to explore a topic in enough detail that you can sort of satisfy yourself scientifically. Oh, this would be novel. I don't know if there's a business case, but it could be novel from a patent perspective. So I was able to rely on that lens. I said, oh, last couple of years, had a baby, thought about milk. No one's doing this thing that's stuck in my brain. But why is that? I mean, like,
Hmm.
if you asked a physician, would they tell you, "Oh, what a dumb idea! Like, this is the reason no one ever does this," right? So I said, "Well, who could I ask?" And if they tell me it's a dumb idea, then I'm done. I'll drop this. But I'm a nerd, so I have a lot of scientist and physician friends. So I would just ask them casually. We're hanging out, and for the most part, they were like, "No, no, that actually would make sense. I mean, I don't know how you would do it, and it's never been done, but if someone did it, that could be really interesting." And so there's this slow process of satisfying myself that maybe I'm onto something, but I don't really know enough to say, like, yes, do this, or no, stop wasting your time. But you start collecting enough evidence, and then you can at least start making one decision or the other, right? So just like an evidence generating or evidence collection process for about 5 years. And then closer to 2017, I called my friend Rick, and we've been friends for years. We've been roommates and drinking buddies in Washington D.C. Made a lot of trouble together. But he was also an FDA expert, and knowing that, I said, "Well, this is a guy. Number one, I can trust him, and number two, if this thing has legs, he could be the kind of person that can maybe help me make that decision." So I was looked through my emails a while ago and be like, when did I first call him about this? It feels like ancient history. And it was January 2017. So
Okay.
I still remember calling him up. I said, this probably sounds so crazy, but just tell me your thoughts. Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. About 45 minutes later, we kind of made a phone handshake deal. Like, look, this is worth both of our efforts. Just nights, weekends, we're
Whoa.
raising kids, we have jobs, we have our spouses. Like, let's just spend a little bit of time. And if it's a hard no, like, whoever gets the hard no, just tell the other person so we can stop wasting our time.
Mm.
That was kind of the handshake deal. I was in Toronto, he was in New Jersey. So I was like, I'm not even going to see you in person for how knows long, but let's just think it through. And like, if you think I'm onto something and you're the guy to help me build it, let's just go in equal. And that's true. That is how we've structured it, equal
That's the
ownership.
beginning. What an awesome story. So, what kind of job were you in previously? And had you been entrepreneurial before that? Or you said you had a couple patents.
That's right. So I took some early stabs at entrepreneurship, like when I had sort of traditional academic jobs. So I did a
Okay.
PhD, then I did a postdoc fellowship, then I did another postdoctoral fellowship. And if you couldn't tell by now, like I just assumed I'd be like this very nerdy lab rat kind of figure. And that appealed to me, right? The process of discovery and academic collegiality and
Mhm.
publishing very interesting, scientific innovations. All of that appealed to me. But I had the fortunate opportunity to exit the traditional academia and try to apply those same skill sets to more like venture development, partnership development, where you could think about problems at a high lens, like, oh, well, what stakeholders could make this crazy innovation happen? And that's a very different mindset than I'm at a bench, I need to execute this study in like an hour because after lunch I have to do a different experiment. You have to be granular, you have to be focused on experiments. That all makes sense, but it also means that you don't necessarily have this frame of mind to think in a different way. Like, well, how do giant organizations tackle a problem? How would they create coalitions? Versus you doing work at the bench, that's very like ground up, and then there's more of a top down philosophy. And I said,
Mm.
that's interesting. What if I could explore that? What if I could have roles that let me do that? And I did have some options to come away from the bench and explore that. So that was very fortunate. So, I mean, like you, I've sort of taken this totally nonlinear path through
Hmm.
life. But now, if you fast forward to today, the skill sets I picked up along the way are exactly what I needed to be here. So, life kind of
Sure.
throws you a bone sometimes.
That's crazy. I mean, what a cool and fascinating story that you were able to make that leap. So, what was the evidence after 5 years that finally propelled you to to go in? I mean, beyond the handshake phone call.
Yes. So I'm going to tell you some very awkward early founder stories
Hmm.
because I think you'll get a laugh out of them. But to your question, like, well, how do you get enough evidence? I mean, there isn't. There's not like, okay, I've achieved a specific threshold. Like
Here's
that's
a
a
guaranteed career
yeah,
for you. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. No one can tell you that.
Mm.
But and I speak to people younger than me who literally grew up with Google as a default product that
Yep.
didn't exist when I was early in my scientific career. So I tell people like the there's so much more information than you could probably ever digest, even if you want to explore this niche topic. So start there. It's not going to cost you a penny. So a couple years of basically doing that. Google Patents, Google Scholar, just general searching. There's also this great real world example that told me, okay, forget all the online searching. This actually means I'm really onto something.
Mm.
The first time I felt that way, I was still in Toronto. I was at an evening reception, like a biotech founders event at a Johnson Johnson facility called J Labs. They'd host mixers, maybe some beer and wine type of thing. It was in Toronto, but just down the street at a maybe a nursing college or a women's college happened to be a annual delegation of the American Academy of Midwives, something like that, doulas and midwives. These are the women that support mothers before and during their birth. So a bunch of these attendees from that midwife or midwifery conference happened to be at the same reception I was at because they were given an invitation. So I just sort of overheard people saying like, "Oh, 30% of the people here are from this, nursing and midwifing conference." I said, "Oh, cool. Maybe I should just ask them because they interact with new moms and breastfeeding literally all day. That's their job." So I talked to them about this vision that I'm going to tell you about, which is milk is full of antibodies, but there's these immunodeficient patients. Like, what if there was a way to transfer the benefits to them because many moms produce extra? Again, that's one of the things I had learned with my own research. But now I'm talking to people who are in the industry. So I'm trying to be very careful and respectful. Like, they're the experts, not me. That's been my philosophy for a lot of these discussions. Like, I can probably learn something from you, but I'd also like to tell you what I'm thinking of, and you can tell me what you think. So every midwife I spoke to that night, within the first 2 minutes of just kind of pitching this vision that was in my brain, no studies, no nothing, they were like, "Yes, that makes perfect sense. Like that would help people. And if that was a thing, I would tell my mom clients, if you have extra, put it for this reason." I mean, all of them said a version of that. So I said, I think I'm actually onto something. And it just illustrates the difference of, you could read how to ride a bike or you could get on a bike and try it, right? I had read patents for years and I had tried to inform myself, but I talked to people who live that world. And then that, 45 minutes of networking feedback that night was in a way probably more valuable than the reading and validation I had been trying to do on my own for a couple of years.
Amazing. So, first of all, I think one of the chief takeaways I'm going to take from this entire interview is the word midwifery. I'm going to start peppering that into my language from now on. I hadn't heard that before. I
As
believe,
often as
yes, I need to just start using that. Okay, so then that's a major plus for the concept of networking in general, because I think a lot of people, especially people who have ideas or they're on the fence or they have a job and they're like you pre-transition to this new phase. I think a lot of people question the value of networking events, especially networking events that cost money, because they think, oh, I need to save all of the money I can. Is it really worth it to go to mixers like that? But it seems to me like you might say, yes, that's very much worth it.
Well, I mean, it depends on the price point. If you're a student, I mean, you can't afford these $1,000 conferences. But I will
Mm.
say, um, if you've gone through grad school, well, I guess most undergrad students, but grad school in particular, you develop like this nose for like free opportunities where there's going to be free booze and free cheese plates. And so this event I was talking about, I pretty sure I didn't pay, or maybe I paid a very small fee. And that's golden, for $20 if you can get a ticket, and then there's going to be like cheese plates there. Um, that you take,
You get a
right?
meal out of it no matter what.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You have a belly
So you
full of
got the boots
cheese,
on the
whether
ground,
you network or
a
not.
belly full of cheese and some booze on the side, and then you're good to
That's
go.
right.
Yes. All right. So that's a very valuable tip for the wannabe entrepreneurs out there. So I was recently at a farm. I was filming a commercial actually for this local farm in my area, Southern California, and they had birthed a cow calf that morning. And of course, like humans, cows, the first batch of milk is the colostrum, right? That first most important thing. And the woman who runs that farm, she was telling me that that colostrum is essential to the health of the cow, and so much so that if they don't get it right away at birth or within some hours, it's going to cause them significant problems for the rest of their life. So, is this something that has to be started at the very, very start of a human's life for it to be effective? Is it related to, because like I said, humans have colostrum as well, or is it something that you just have to get as soon as possible?
Wow, great question. So the short answer is human milk provides critical immune and nutritional protection to the breastfeeding infant as long as that breastfeeding takes place. In fact, once you stop breastfeeding, so they're weaned off of breast milk, the protection still lasts for some amount of time after that because whatever was their last feed, I mean, they've consumed a bunch of antibodies from that feeding. And those antibodies are actually quite long lived. So they will remain in circulation for some time. So it's not like, oh, late milk is non-valuable. There's never not going to be value. It's again, it's critical, nature's first superfood, really.
Right.
But you're also right that the very earliest colostrum is just so much more enriched for certain nutrients and antibodies compared to later milk. And evolutionarily, that makes sense. I mean, they're literally just born. They've been exposed to all the germs in their outside environment, outside the placenta, for the first time ever. So the most time of need would be that period. And that's why colostrum, like you have this spike of nutrients and antibodies at that early session. To your point, like from a sourcing perspective, we don't have the luxury of saying like, oh no, we just want these early colostrum samples because they're so jam packed, and we don't want anything else. That wouldn't be
It's
realistic.
not practical, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be feasible from a supply perspective. Luckily for us, there is a pooling strategy, and this starts getting into like the nerdy immunology of this all, which is that if we're healthy, we're generating antibodies against all the germs in our environment. You're experiencing very different germs on the West Coast than I am on the East Coast, but we're in the same country.
We're experiencing smog germs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And we're facing floods in the New York subway. So trust me,
We're facing flood germs.
yeah, flood and
Maybe
rat
bed
germs.
bugs.
That's right.
Right.
But we're all fighting multitudes of germs at any given time. Um, and so that also means that milk recreates that protection. If this mom has experienced, 30 germs in the past couple of months, her antibodies likely reflect that. Another mom 100 miles away is still facing germs, but they're not identical. So the way we can maximize that and leverage the fact that, oh, they are actually different. In the pharma world, you typically want a drug product to be very clean and very pure. Every pill is the exact same. That's a chemical product strategy. This strategy, what we're talking about, is almost the opposite. Let's go for breadth of coverage. Let's go for difference in antibody repertoires. And so the way you achieve that is simply by pooling samples from different people all into like a master batch. So now the antibodies are from all these different moms that have faced different germs. They have different backgrounds. And so they're pooled, and then we can run antibody extraction procedures, which we've already developed and which we have several patents on, so that the end product is this massive conglomeration of antibodies from, in the future, could be thousands of donors per batch. Right now we've done in the tens, we've done in the hundreds. So you have to work your way up. At the early proof of concept, you're not going to have thousands of samples ready, obviously.
So do these kids end up growing up with superpowers of some kind? Like they can scale a building with their bare hands? I mean, do they have some sort of advantage from having much more input than normal people?
So breastfed infants compared to formula-fed infants do have improved histories of fewer infections. And it would make sense. And the literature supports and suggests that the antibodies in breast milk and the other immune factors provide a protective layer that formula cannot. And so infant formula, you can replicate things like sugars and fat contents. Like there's no shortage of those in the American diet, right? They're easy to synthesize and put into foods. So formula manufacturers are certainly able to recapitulate those elements of natural breast milk. They cannot recapitulate antibodies because they have to be naturally produced against all the different germs in the environment. There's no synthetic way to say this antibody fights flu and that antibody fights COVID. You can do those individually. The pharmaceutical world has created antibody products in that way, but that's one at a time. There's tens of thousands of different germs that infect just our respiratory tract, and then a different 10,000 set of germs in your gastrointestinal tract, and then other ones that want to infect your eyes, or other ones that try to infect your blood. So we're talking about literally tens, probably hundreds of thousands of different viral, bacterial, fungal, and parasitic species. There's no company that can be like, all right, well, we're starting here. We just need to get to 100,000 of these, right? That's not a viable replacement for what we're trying to do.
But if the kid has 10,000 donors, they're going to be able to go to New Jersey, no problem, even if they're born on the West Coast. Whereas my kid would struggle. I mean, do they have a leg up, or is it really just catching up to even?
Well, if you're talking about the patients we want to treat someday with this product, and I should make a critical distinction, this is not limited to children.
Right.
The immunodeficient patients we're talking about, they're around the world, and they're of all ages. In many cases, they're not even diagnosed that early because many of the conditions we care about are rare diseases, which means the diagnostic tests to even verify that they have a disease are not, super robust. And you would need a specialist physician to even think about ordering the test or interpreting the test. So if you're taking your child to a typical general pediatrician, their mind isn't thinking about rare diseases as often because they're rare. They don't come up that often. They're focused on the germs that every kid on the playground is sharing among each other.
Like 1 in 50,000, right? For some of the immunodeficiencies you're talking about.
Yeah, you've done your math. Yeah, you've done your homework. So the prevalence or the incidence rates vary a lot. Some of them it's 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 20,000 or 1 in 30,000. And those are pretty rough estimates, by the way. Like those aren't hard figures. The whole point is diagnosis is difficult, so we don't know how many patients have never been diagnosed but have lived their whole lives with it. And and you see these testimonials. This is an interesting bridge between like the clinical reporting of a disease state versus the lived experience or the subjective
Sure.
experience. So the clinical reporting is the incidence rates, kind of the ones you just said, what's around 1 in 50,000. Subjectively and experientially, what it means is that a lot of people who maybe have less access to medical knowledge or even just less access to healthcare's systems because maybe they're in a remote region, they're less likely to even think about seeking a specialist. They might just say, ever since I was a kid, I got sick more often than my classmates. But it's preschool; everyone gets sick, so no
Yeah.
physician ever flagged this uh, to attract a special attention or extra attention.
Mm.
And so they
Mm.
basically live their life just feeling sick most of the time.
Mm.
And unfortunately, you have some physician-patient relationships where the patient is told, like, some of this is probably in your head. You should try to live your life, and
Mhm.
like simple over the counter, just take cough syrup if you're going
Right.
out.
Just
And
take more pills, more medicine. Right.
yeah, yeah. So the incentives are not always aligned for the patient's specific experience, and maybe that's a larger question about how our healthcare structures are built. But it does mean that there's these shortcomings in the patient experience for this multitude of reasons.
So then what percentage of mothers who have kids who have this would even be aware of the fact that they wouldn't be giving their child the necessary antibodies? Is that something you think most of them would have figured out by the time they reached adulthood, or many just simply wouldn't know?
Oh, good question. Do you mean like why would they choose to not breastfeed, or why would they not be able to and go
Well,
the formula
right.
route
Is
instead?
it simply that they're not able to, or that they choose not to, or that the quality of their milk is fundamentally different?
Oh, okay. Well, in terms of the quality of milk, the guidances from the milk bank community, who we've taken a lot of efforts to actually engage them and get to know them and earn their trust. And then the pediatric guidance, the immunology guidance is all pretty consistent that your milk is best for your baby, right? If the
Right.
alternative was not milk, meaning formula or maybe some other food products,
Right.
that can't provide these immune benefits that your milk does. So your milk is the best option for your child, bar none. There's nothing else. Everything else is in second or third place. So that's a pretty consistent guidance.
Mm.
But maybe where you're also getting at is like, what are the factors that encourage mothers to forego breastfeeding, or that prohibit them from doing it, even if they did want to? And then these are factors that are more cultural. They're not related to our company, but because we've thought about this a lot, I can try to share some insight. So
Sure.
sometimes there's mothers that produce very little. That's just a biological reality. That's not something they can control.
Right.
On the flip side, some mothers produce like freezers full that is so much more that they're ever going to use, so they donate
Right.
to meat banks. So
Right.
you have production on a spectrum, like producing way too much, producing way too little. That happens naturally. But then there's other structures like your employer may not have very permissive or supportive policies for you to take breaks and have a dedicated room that you could pump. So you could pump it in these little containers and put them in your cooler bag, take it home at the end of the day, and then park it in your freezer until you need it. Right? If you have access, you'll keep producing. And then, of course, there's mothers that just don't want to, or don't want to after a certain amount of time, right? I mean, there's a lot of
True.
factors.
True.
Some are choices, some are that conditions imposed on these mothers, unfortunately, even if they may have wanted to. So there's a lot of reasons. And then, of course, the formula industry has its own advertising arm, so it can sell to these mothers and convince them that, look, you don't have to breastfeed. If you can, great. And if you don't want to, that's why we develop these products. It's to support you and your baby. And they have
Right.
very feel good marketing around that. I mean,
Right.
that's a very mature industry. They've had many, many decades to build out the marketing strategy to convince mothers that this is a useful product. It will provide certain layers of protection.
Mhm. And that's kind of like when I think of the 50s, this sort of better living through chemistry time where like chemists have figured out a way that you don't even need breast milk. Here's the formula, right? And all these powders and chemical compounds and all that was the miracle of that time. And it almost seems like now we're coming back to this age where we realize, okay, we got to dial that back. Plastics. Oh, there's a bunch of things that are resultant from that we don't, that maybe are harmful to us or that we didn't fully know the consequences of in that time. And now it seems like we're looking at more foundational, natural things across the board. So it makes sense to me that your choice, and I think it speaks volumes that something so natural and obvious, I mean, to you, of course, had not been considered by anybody else. because nobody was looking in that way. Everybody's trying to synthesize something, and you said, "Hey, but this is a natural thing." So you think that's
That's
part of a broader shift?
Yeah, this is a great point. And, as with any founder, if you maybe are onto something and you share it with the right people, and if it's a good idea, which I think ours is, people will start asking, like this, they'll say to us after a pitch or after a meeting, like, this makes perfect sense. Like, are you telling me no one ever tried this?
Right.
Or maybe they tried it and it didn't work. And are you just not realizing that this is the reasons it can't work? So that was part of the education process. You have to satisfy yourself that if someone took early attempts but it never went anywhere, why is that? Like, are we just going to face the same hurdles that someone solved, someone got stuck with 20 years ago,
Yep.
which means we've wasted our time? Or is it in fact this opportunity that hasn't been sought after? And as far as we know, and we've both scoured the literature on like FDA approved products, and it's never been done. It's not out there. So the biggest companies that have all the money they could have thrown at this have not chosen to engage the breast milk community or the milk bank community in this way. So that's something I take a lot of pride in because that's not about the technical elements of a biotech company. That's about relationship building. And then it comes back to the networking point you were making before. We had to start this with literally cold calls to milk bank executive directors because their phone numbers are publicly listed, fortunately for me. And I said, I'm calling because I have this crazy idea. It's in my brain. I can't get it out. I just want to get a couple of thoughts from you. And, if you could provide some input, maybe I can do some self-funded studies to capture some of these early hypotheses and capture some data sets that would further validate this. And that's exactly how that process went, by the way.
So when did you realize that you had a patentable concept in all of this? And broadly speaking, in terms that I can't completely rip off, although I'll try later and sell it to foreign governments. Um,
Great.
how does the patent work? What is the tech that you came up with then? I think you sort of hinted
Yeah,
at it
it's a
earlier
big
a little
question.
bit. Yeah.
It's a big question. So, I mean, like getting an approved patent goes through in the US, it's the US Patent and Trademark Office. And, they have a lot of similarities with other patent offices in other jurisdictions. There's always nuances country to country, but in general, you're looking for some layer of novelty that satisfies the patent reviewer. Now, a big part of their job is to scour what they call the prior art, which means anything out there in the public domain that would be searchable and knowable by people who are interested in the same space. So if you're going to propose something, you have to proactively say we're aware of these other types of citations and these other types of studies, and what we are presenting is different and novel and differentiated and not obvious based on all these forms of prior art. And that's a significant hurdle to overcome.
I
But
can imagine.
overcoming that is how you get from a filed patent to a granted patent. We've done it 3 times for Lactiga so far, meaning 3 granted patents. We have several more pending, which just means we're still going through the process of like it's filed, but we're waiting for feedback, and we would have to respond to the feedback. And if we're successful, those will convert into granted patents. It's a very lengthy process. There's a lot of strategy in it. Like you could take the scientist first lens, which I did in my earliest patents early in my life, and those led to granted patents. So it's nice to show them on my resume, but I had really not done any of the homework of venture creation or like who could I sell this to or how much would it cost. And that's okay. That's an early part of the discovery period or the self-education process. So I encourage all the young nerds out there. I mean, if you it doesn't have to be a patent, but it could be a white paper or something like that, or just something proprietary. And that way you've created what's called intellectual property. So that doesn't have to be a granted patent that's recognized by the patent office, but it could be something so proprietary it runs on your laptop and like you're not sharing it out, so it does this very specific thing and no one else could replicate it or no one else could easily replicate it. If you can do anything along that spectrum, you've created intellectual property.
Mm.
That's a
And
cool
then you,
feeling, but converting that into like
yeah.
something monetizable or the foundations of a business, well, that's very different. You better have really done your homework on business fundamentals, and that's, as you know, that's a totally different type of research than anything scientific and creating a technology in a laboratory.
And in your case, it was essentially synthesizing thousands of different donors and pulling the antibodies from that in a form that you could administer to somebody new, right?
That's right. And so our company's in the preclinical stage. So we haven't tested
Yeah,
this in patients yet, but
sure.
any company like ours has to start with preclinical studies
Yep.
such that you can start framing out a proposed clinical trial framework. You seek approvals from the FDA. If you get that approval, then you can start testing in people. So that inflection point that you just touched on, for us, that should be next year. That should be
Okay.
2024, where we're taking
Wow.
these extracted products for the first time, giving it to patients with obviously very careful monitoring for safety. I mean, safety and tolerability is the only and critical endpoint of the first in human clinical trials. So before you're asking, like, did you give enough? Is it working? It's really about, like, is it tolerable and safe at the doses you've given? And you cannot move anything forward until you've addressed those safety parameters.
So this is a very exciting time. I mean, 6 years on, but this is probably still. I mean, you're in the heart of it, and obviously, I've seen, from Crunchbase and what limited information there is. Like, you've raised some funding for this and some, fairly serious funding. Would you say that most of your day to day now is in seeking more funding, or is it just in getting these approvals that you need? What is the biggest hurdle, or what's the work right now for you mainly?
It's a great question. You actually hit both of them on the head. So yes, we're spending way more time fundraising than we wish we could, because that's just how the process goes. But
Sure.
in parallel, we're absolutely focused on some of the regulatory actions that we are actually want to submit to the FDA quite soon. Those these two have to go hand in hand. It's kind of important for entrepreneurs to realize that you'll basically always be in fundraising mode, but the outside world will still expect you to push forward the research. In our case, push forward the regulatory documents that establish your proposal to the FDA, so that they can take their time to review the proposal, so that they can return their feedback to the company, so the company can then execute on the required next steps. I mean, all this has to happen in parallel. I'm not the CEO, I'm the chief scientist. So, in
Sure.
addition to everything I just said, I'm also trying to continue working with our scientists all around North America to make sure that the data sets that justify everything we've just been talking about actually come out as data sets that we can use and synthesize and put into reports. A publication we just put out quite recently. So, these things all have to happen in parallel. Like, you might wish that, let me just do the science this month and then I'll focus on fundraising next month. Never works that way.
Mm.
Everyone expects your input all at the same time.
Right. How many people are you managing? How many people are part of the company now?
We're very small and lean. So I have my co-founder Ricken, so we're the two co-founders. We have a project manager named Shruti. So there's really just the three of us as the core team. We're
Okay.
all in Central Jersey, so we do meet on site together in our office
Yeah.
space about once or twice a week. The rest of our time, I'm just me sitting at my laptop in my apartment here and getting
Yeah.
the work done. And then we have collaborators literally around the US and Canada, even a collaborator we want to keep working with out in the UK. Yeah, we've got partners that support us from, essentially all remote locations. But it's
That's
worked
great.
for us, right? We've been able to keep our core team extremely lean, which means you're keeping the overhead down. I don't have beanbag
Right.
chairs in a fancy office and a company car. Like, we've never had any of those things.
You're not copying the WeWork example, I see.
Yeah, that's not the
Yeah.
plan for us.
So, yeah, 6 years in, you made a tremendous life shift. Do you feel good about that decision? Do you feel that you've made the right choice in your personal life? And what makes you feel that you have, if so?
So I'm 45 now, and only maybe in the past, like, 6 to 9 months do I have a feeling of, look, things could still go to hell in any even large companies, but especially small companies. That's always possible. But
Yes.
only in the last 6 to 9 months have I felt a lot more confidence to feel that, no, we're on a train that clearly, like, the success is over the horizon. I can see it. If we keep executing, we'll get there. Right? We've made some of our early mistakes, and that's okay. Like, they've made us stronger. We know how to work together better. We know how to be more efficient with our dollars. We've been efficient with our dollars, but that's a process you want to improve. And so, I think you're framing this as like a lesson to listeners. Like, when do you reach that point? You'll never have that early on in any type of new venture, right? It'll be all uncertainty, little pieces of upside that convince you may be onto something promising, but things can still fall apart.
Right, little
And
pieces of downside sprinkled in as well. Like,
absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, people draw that, peaks and valleys graph for
right,
entrepreneurship. Like, we've lived that. It's absolutely true.
right,
And now we're at this stage where, in a given week of emails, more of those emails are about small to medium sized wins, and very few of them are about, like, oh, this didn't work, or like, you probably have to repeat it, or it's going to be more expensive than you thought. Right, early on, the balance was a little more different. Like, just a bunch of
sure.
rejections, a bunch of no's, and, like, every once in a while, oh, your patent got granted. Oh, that's kind of a huge deal because I just got 20 no's this week, so I'm going to really, like, celebrate this win.
Yeah,
Now we're at this point where we're getting more wins anyway, and I'm not saying I take them for granted, but it kind of tells us that the company trajectory is really solid. the way we keep executing is the reason we keep getting wins. And not all of it's going to work. You get some rejections, you get some no's, but we know how to move past that and not even dwell on it, which is kind of nice for me in the dating world as well, to not dwell on rejection too much and just so maybe some crossover lessons there.
Yeah, some crossover lessons for sure. So sometimes somebody was asking me, I was talking to some very smart people at a dinner recently, and they were asking me what I looked for in companies. I'm not an investor, but I guess I invest in people in the sense of relationships. I mean, I'm very conscious clearly in the types of people that I seek out. And I've been very adamant from day one of this show that financial incentive is not, and financial reward is not the reason that I'm doing this. I'm not seeking out the richest people who have the most. That's not my target. I'm looking for a different kind of person. So somebody asked what was the criteria that I used. And I said, well, there was a lesson from when I was a small child, and my dad was taking us to a drive-thru at McDonald's. I was really young. And there were actually two drive-thrus side by side. And there were 10 cars in one of them and 0 cars in the other one. And every single car just assumed that the right one was broken. And my dad just drove to the right one, and it was in fact open. And that was a really powerful lesson to me, that just because everybody is doing one thing, that doesn't mean that it's the thing that you should be doing. And in fact, maybe if you do the other thing, that's where greater reward lies, because other people waited 15 minutes and we waited 0 seconds. I never forgot. I was probably 6 years old when that lesson came to me. And so I seek out the different, right? And I think a lot of the different that I seek out is based on first principles, as Elon might call them, or others, which is, what are we solving for humanity? I see a lot of shiny objects in entrepreneurship between NFTs and crypto and all of these new little things that I don't fully understand their value, if I'm being honest. But something like this is just so fundamentally clear. It adheres to the first principles of humanity, and that's what makes it interesting. Like, I can understand what you're trying to do in a way that it's obvious that it's important. And that's why I am drawn to it versus like, hey, check out this app that might make me $1 billion. Like, I don't know. I don't know about that. Do you feel the same way working on something first principles-ish? Do you feel a sense of deeper motivation, perhaps?
Oh, completely. Well, thank you for saying that. It's a clear message and it's something you can get behind. I mean, that's
Yes.
clearly a big piece of our fundraising success.
Right.
They want to see the financials, the technology, the due diligence, all fine. But I think we're at that point where the narrative we can put forward as founders is that I, as the investor, I don't have to guess that this guy's passionate. I don't have to guess that he's all in. It's so clear he lives and breathes this. If I invest in him, he's already invested in himself and his partners. Like it's almost a foregone conclusion.
Mm.
To your point about motivations, I mean, I went to grad school. You get his tiny student stipend. I mean, it was generous for a young guy, but
Right.
you learn as a grad student this phrase opportunity cost, which anyone with some business background, they know what that is in their late teens. I learned that in maybe like my late 20s. And not to
I'm
blame
still
Facebook,
trying to learn it.
yeah, it's an ongoing process, and not to blame Facebook, but it was like very popular at the time I was a grad student, like early
Yeah.
2000s. So all my feeds were my friends who had become like a bank teller right out of college, or went into, I don't know, junior law intern, and they're posting about their luxury vacations. We've all heard about this, like the way
Sure.
people
Yeah.
post on Instagram or Facebook. And I'm seeing that. And here I am making, like a little bit of money in Texas with my cargo shorts and my thrift store shirts. And I was like, my intention is to get a PhD out of this program. I love the collegial environment, but it kind of throws the meaning of opportunity cost in your face. It's like, you're going to be 25 soon, 26 soon, and hopefully you'll have your degree. But your other friends are 25 and, they're whatever, pulling in their banker bonuses. I mean, that's just a different level of living. And so the point is, I knew that this was a difference and I wasn't living life the way some of these other people were. But I was also contributing what I felt was meaningful science, right? Again, I did grad school, then I did a postdoctoral fellowship, then I did a second postdoctoral fellowship and developed some of these patents along the way. I said, I am kind of building my skills. I am investing in myself. And a really unfortunate situation is that like early scientific trainee opportunities, you don't make a ton of money. Like the industry has never been structured that way.
Mm.
And so I guess that's the downside. But the upside is you find yourself with a tribe of people who are also motivated to create impact and knowledge and to disseminate that knowledge. That's a tribe that I still respect for those reasons. I'm able to put on like a business person's hat and say, the way they've chosen their careers, it's not going to be super lucrative. I can look at that as an outsider because I was in that track as well.
Right.
And I think they understand that at a fundamental level. But if you've only done academia and that's all you've ever known, it's very hard to evaluate your opportunities objectively and say, oh, here's how I would make 2 times as much. Right. For me, I actually had the opportunity because a friend of a friend was exiting a well-paid job supporting the Department of Defense for medical countermeasures portfolio development in the DC, Virginia area. That's the job I exited academia for. Incredibly informative. I was well paying compared to the academic positions I had. I bought suits. I learned to tie my tie and wear my suits each day. And I was lucky to have those experiences. But my whole first half of my career was not about this is how I get to $1 million or a huge bonus. And none of those things have happened. So but here, the entrepreneur journey is a version of that. It's like, look, you can take a salary and that's fine. Our investors understand that and they're okay with that. The true upside is in the company actually growing and succeeding and patients actually benefiting. As we can drive towards that, then I don't have to, I'm not worried. Put it this way, I'm not really worried that I can ever make a great salary because that wasn't really my motivation in the first place. If I was motivated to make a great salary, I would have went into finance or something like that, and I
Yeah.
didn't. So I'm sort of where I'm meant to be. I think that's just like you with hosting this podcast and like being the kind of person you are. Like this is where you're meant to be, and I feel the same about myself.
Such a profound bit of wisdom you just gave out there, right there. You said it so perfectly. And depending on what you're working on, that opportunity cost manifests itself in different ways. Now, I live out here in Los Angeles, and that opportunity cost is also a function of time, especially people who pursue anything like art or being an actor or being a director, people being in the movie or entertainment business, or people being an entrepreneur. There's this element of, let's just say, for the point of comparison, person A is making $150,000 a year every single year, just incrementally going up. Person B is making $0 to $10,000 a year, but perhaps one day they go through the roof. And that's the entrepreneur way, right? Maybe you strike it big, but the longer you're at 0 or near to 0, the further up you have to go when you actually strike it big. And somebody who's trying to be an actor for 30 years getting by, then you think, well, that payout must be massive at that point because you've gone 30 years of foregoing that $150,000 salary. And that's where time is a factor in all of this for us people. And I think many people feel that sense of time and that time pressure in their own careers on both sides, right? Like I've been in person A and but now I'll never get to do my entrepreneur dream or my creative dream. And eventually creators say, gosh, I'm sick of being poor all the time. So there's almost a grass is greener, right, from both sides. But that's why I personally believe, of course, that having a mission that's greater than making money is the most important thing because it's easier to hang your hat on that, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a really tough choice to make. Just like you said, I mean, I can make super low wages, and I don't know actors, but you kind of hear this over and over that they will do gig work and just wait tables for years and years so they can
For
afford
years.
apartment, afford some acting classes, do some like commercial
Yep.
gigs,
Yep.
and that's how it has to be done. Yeah, yeah. I admire people that have that long term vision because that is what it takes. You have to be like, 40K jobs for the first 10 years of my career will position me for that future payoff. And you have to really be able to see that and envision that. But here's an interesting counterpoint. I've had a
Okay.
handful of my friends, and this was a couple years ago, just seeing, they're seeing on LinkedIn that I'm bringing Lactiga, growing the team and hitting these milestones. And they know that this thing didn't exist. There was no company before we created it.
Right.
And these happen to two or three people I'm thinking of. They happen to be in very traditional sectors, very well paid sectors. So once you get in, there's no good reason to get out. But we do catch up calls, or they reach out and be like, "I haven't talked to you in forever. I see you on LinkedIn. Maybe we could talk about it. We'd love to catch up." And they expressed kind of a wistfulness that they've been doing very well at the more traditional job. They get the pension, the vacation, the benefits, all the things that you're supposed to get those jobs for. But they had a wistfulness because, in their words, they had these entrepreneurial visions that never went anywhere because they didn't know how to execute, and they weren't, basically weren't willing to take a plunge away from a reliable source of income and benefits and then to do this self-funded route where none of those benefits are guaranteed to you. So there's always that trade-off. I mean, They could afford the vacations that I wasn't even dreaming of when I was a grad student. But then, this is how that trade off happens. And I didn't make them feel bad about it or anything, but I think the enthusiasm I have for what I'm trying to do and why it keeps me so motivated, I think that comes across pretty quickly. And so I think people with very traditional jobs, 20 years with an enterprise, it's probably a little harder to have that passion because you've just been doing a version of the same thing for your boss for a long time. For me, I'm not trying to please my boss. I'm trying to like execute against something bigger than myself, as you've said.
Yeah. And that fulfillment factor, that mission factor, it'd be hard to quantify it in terms of dollars. And we know we live in a society where money is important, obviously, right? If you want to live, you want to retire, you want to do all of those things, of course, money is important. But I think we as a society are learning more day by day that a sense of fulfillment and mission is also very, very important. And it's been said there was that woman who wrote the top 10 regrets of the dying. Of course, not acting on an impulse is one of the number one regrets of people who die, that they didn't take that leap. And a lot of people say that they focused too much on work. So, but pros, you and I will never solve that debate. I think one thing is right for some people, one thing is right for other people. Definitely shouldn't encourage people who are happy in their job to leave their job. But if somebody is making the plunge, or if they aren't happy and they're ready for a change, then I think hearing a story like yours is very valuable. And that's kind of where I hope to meet the listeners of this show and people who might be. It's like, if somebody who's considering it says, here's Viraj, here's what he did. Does that inspire you? Is that something you want to do or not? Right? And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, let's hope so. It's
I
kind of
find
like,
it very inspiring. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much. I feel like the best quick lesson for anyone that's on the fence like that is like, invest in yourself, and the earlier the better. And actually, another version of that that's a little more about my particular journey is, as I said to you, it was really important to me to seek out people that I feel are smarter than me because they know medicine better than me, or elements of science, and or even just business fundamentals and business growth. Like I'm thinking about pitching this business I've never pitched before. Like, does this make any sense? Right? You seek feedback from people you trust, and some of them, I think, without meaning to, they gave feedback which was fairly negative, which is like, well, this has never been done this way. Like, big companies don't operate this way. These are all the reasons that it wouldn't work or should not work.
Yeah.
And they're probably well meaning. They're trying to spare their friend from wasting his time and sparing him from heartache. But when I say invest in yourself, what I mean is, if you're actually doing the homework, they've never thought about this venture the way I have. Like, myself and my partner, we've been eating and sleeping this for many years now. Like, let's be very realistic. There's no one around the world that's done this level of homework on this very particular niche opportunity for these very specific patient cohorts other than us.
Mm.
So now we can speak with some authoritativeness or some knowledge about this. But early on, I didn't have any feeling of authority on this subject. So when you ask people, again, they think they're doing you a favor and they are imparting knowledge that they actually have from their sector, but it doesn't mean it's a reason for you to say no or to shut down your idea. That's what I mean by invest in yourself or trust yourself most.
Right. And you have to cultivate that sense. That's such a powerful way. I mean, we're wrapping this thing up now. You have to, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to cultivate that sense of, I know what I'm doing, and you have to believe in your own intuition and your own intelligence. You have to. You have to trust that. Otherwise, it's simply not going to work. I think that's a really powerful thing you just said. Because again, you're out on a rickety boat by yourself in stormy waters, right? So you better trust yourself. You better believe in yourself. Nobody else may. You may get 20 rejections or
And
200
the funny thing is,
or
part of it
2,000.
is, part of it is projecting confidence. You may not totally feel it. It may not be internal, but you better find a way to make it external, right? That phrase, fake it till you make it. It's so
Right.
cliche at this point, but there's an element of truth in that. It's like, you may know that the last two experiments just look like garbage, but the ones before those were still pretty good. So we're still onto something, right? So putting your best face forward. But again, at this point, there's no huge failures for us to highlight in the disclosure process or the diligence process. We've just been very fortunate to hit this traction where when we try something, I think it's a testament to having thought it through first and worked it through with our consultants or our scientists, so that by the time you execute, you've set yourself up for success because you've spent the upfront time to design it in a way that you're most likely to see what you were planning to see, or something that supports your hypothesis. So you can do all that homework up front, and now you're positioning yourself for success so that the outcomes keep feeding back into this positive narrative. Then you have that flywheel effect that a lot of like tech startups like to talk about in the Valley. Once the flywheel is moving, you're not trying as much because it's already moving. It's already doing the forward
It's
motion for
going.
you.
Yeah.
You're just kind of supporting that and, nurturing that and keeping the flywheel going.
And to that end, I think your academic background surely prepared. You said everything has led you to this moment, and I'm sure that your academic background has helped you to understand what the adequate amount of evidence would be for any hypothesis, right? If you're defending a dissertation or a paper, you know that you're going to need to back that up. And in this case, the dissertation or the paper is your life or your company. So you probably had a better than average concept of what level of evidence you would need in order to make this happen, if I had to guess.
In the
Versus,
biotech world, I mean, every sector has its expected
yeah,
level of knowledge. In biotech, I mean, like I said, I did this PhD, I did these postdoc fellowships, and the point of those is the rigor of expectations that your peers and your colleagues will have of you forces you to, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know how to synthesize information. I mean, if you come away from the science world and the Google world, if you and I want to take opposite positions on whatever debate, we could do it in 5 seconds, right? Like you can find
right.
evidence in your favor on Google, and I can find it in my favor on Google, and now we're just arguing a bunch of blogs and links that neither of us really wrote the originating science or the
Easily.
originating
Yeah.
points. We're just regurgitating points that support what we already feel.
Yeah.
What I love about science is it's not driven by that process. It's supposed to be more empirical and evidence driven, and you're always standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before you. So when we talk about these are the fundamentals that suggest this technology should work, that's based on the last 5 years, last 20 years, even the last 60 years of immunology. But now I don't even get to think about this much, but now maybe we're one of the new contributors to the cutting edge of this domain because we're putting out data sets that are different from previous studies that have been done. So 10, 20 years from now, will we be the reference point for some new entrepreneur? Like that's a really special feeling. I haven't even had time to really sit and process that, but this is part of contributing to the scientific literature and the public domain. This is knowledge that can benefit different people in different ways, and so it should be out there.
Well, that's a great way to wrap it up. I think that's what you're doing for sure. From from a distance, it sure appears that way, and I'm extremely excited to see what the implications of this are in the next year, as you said, and beyond. 5 to 10 years, who knows? But it's profoundly cool. I'm glad I found you. Thanks again for saying yes and agreeing to share your story. It was even more interesting than I imagined that it would be when we started this call. So I very much appreciate it, and I'll keep cheering you on. It's just super cool and it's super exciting. So may the next two steps go very well for you. And unless you have any parting words, I think we'll wrap it up. Anything last you want to get in, or where people can find you, promote your work, any of that?
Oh, sure. Well, the website is lactiga.com, LACTIGA.com. But, I'll just leave the last two words, which we covered a couple minutes ago, is trust yourself.
Well, that's a perfect
And,
ending.
yeah, with that, Ross, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure getting to know you today.
The pleasure was all mine. And with that, the official podcast is over.